Multiple intense tornadoes are possible tonight, along with all hazards of severe weather, and a serious flood risk is ongoing along the Gulf Coast. More than 50 million Americans are within risk zones. And on top of that, Thursday's severe weather episode includes more than 60 million people in a slight 2 out of 5 risk in the Northeast, while a flooding risk associated with a tropical disturbance will be continuing along the Gulf. Tonight's severe weather in the Midwest is one of the more robust setups that we may see in all of 2026. So I'm going to break down everything that you need to know so that you can stay safe tonight. Let's jump right into the forecast. Taking a look at our convective day one outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, we do have a marginal risk that extends all the way from Oklahoma to western Pennsylvania and even into parts of the northern Midwest like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Meanwhile, we have a slight risk that extends from southeastern Kansas and through Detroit and even as far as Rochester, Minnesota. But in the pit of our avocado, our severe weather avocado here, and this orange and red, that's going to be where our primary concern is for the severe weather outbreak tonight, where we're expecting a large line of semi-discrete supercells that could put down multiple strong tornadoes tonight. We also need to pay attention to what's going on the Gulf Coast, where we do have a marginal risk of severe weather, but really this general thunderstorm risk in large portions of the South is going to bring a significant risk for flooding associated with that tropical disturbance that we've had coming out of Mexico. And that's going to bring a lot of rainfall, and it's already brought a lot of rainfall to this region. It's a very saturated area, and there's already a lot of significant flash flooding going on. So if you're down in that area, you need to make sure that if you see flooding on roads, just turn around. It's not worth it. Make sure that you're staying aware of the flash flooding risk in your region. Jumping into our tornado probabilities for the day, we do actually have a 2% region on the Gulf Coast. That's going to be associated with the extra shear that's being put in place in the atmosphere, essentially the change of wind speed and direction with height. That's what's getting forced into this region with that tropical disturbance, which is going to create the risk for a couple of spin up tornadoes. So there's a 2% risk there. But our main event is going to be up in the Midwest, where we have a large SIG 1 risk, and we also have a SIG 2 risk for areas like Springfield, Peoria, Lafayette. This is throughout central Illinois and northwestern Indiana. So this is going to be a very, very concerning area for this evening in terms of the potential for some stronger tornadoes. Meanwhile, with the wind risk, we do have a 30% region that you see in red in the middle here, and we have a very large wind risk throughout a large portion of the Midwest here, and even stretching as far as Oklahoma and Kansas into the plains. As the wind risk, as things become a little bit more linear, is definitely going to increase. And as nighttime approaches and these storms become a little bit more nocturnal, they'll become a little bit more downdraft dominant. And at that point, the wind risk will be elevated as well. We also have a little bit of a wind risk going on the Gulf Coast, again, associated with that tropical disturbance. I believe there is a tropical storm warning in place in Louisiana, but other than that, it's not the most significant risk on the Gulf Coast, but it's one that you need to pay attention to. Meanwhile, our hail risk does have a very large region as well, which has been upgraded a little bit. Now, I'm not expecting today's event to be a major hail producer. The fact that we're going to have a bunch of semi-discrete supercells in a line means that there's a pretty good risk that at least one or two of them will end up producing some very large hail. So the Storm Prediction Center has opted to go with a 30% SIG 1 risk for the possibility of that very large hail. It's stretching all the way from north of Springfield, Missouri, and into northern and western portions of Indiana and through all of central Illinois. So the hail risk is there, but again, it's not like my number one concern for the night. I also wanted to look ahead at tomorrow's severe weather risk. So this is now for Thursday, the 18th. We do have a very large slight risk in place, as well as an even larger marginal risk in place. That's going to be stretching throughout the mid-Atlantic and all the way up into the Northeast for that slight risk. And that marginal risk is going to extend all the way from Texas through the South into parts of Florida and as far north as Maine. So this is a very, very expansive region where we're not expecting the most robust severe weather, but there is definitely a risk, especially for wind. Looking at tomorrow's tornado risk, there is a 2% region outlined in the south. Again, that's going to be due to that tropical disturbance as it begins to push through Mississippi and Alabama. That's going to increase the shear. Again, that's the wind change in direction and speed with height. It's going to increase that shear in the atmosphere and present the risk for a couple of spin-up tornadoes. Meanwhile, wind is going to be our main threat on the East Coast, especially as we do have this just enormous region where wind damage is expected. This is a 15% that you're seeing in yellow risk for wind damage on Thursday. And then finally, our hail risk tomorrow on Thursday, we do have an isolated risk for some smaller to medium-sized hail throughout portions of Texas and Oklahoma. But again, hail is really not our number one concern. Looking off into the not so distant future, we do have a lot of general thunderstorms expected on Friday with a 1 out of 5 marginal risk for severe weather in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And that's going to be again associated with that tropical disturbance as it continues to push off in that direction. Saturday, however, is going to be our next more significant risk for severe weather, which is going to include Nebraska and Kansas and other areas in the Central Plains, as we're going to get another Rossby wave in our atmosphere that's going to fire off of the Rockies and present another wave with another low pressure system that will drive more severe weather in the Central Plains into this weekend. Taking a quick look at what's going on around the country this morning, we do have showers going on in the Gulf Coast. Again, that's going to continue that flooding risk, but more importantly, we do have a lot of showers and thunderstorms in the northern plains and the Midwest. And especially this cluster of thunderstorms that's going on in Iowa right now is going to continue on its way, and it's going to push into Illinois. And where that sets up and dissipates is going to play a large role in our severe weather this evening. Now, here's what the latest run of the HRRR, which is the high resolution rapid refresh model. It's one of our better convective allowing models, essentially a model that allows for thunderstorms. Here's what it thinks is going to happen with that cluster of thunderstorms throughout the afternoon. This is by 11 a.m. here and getting into noon, 1 p.m. It's just beginning to push through the Chicago, Springfield area and into towards Indianapolis. And as it begins to push out in that direction, it's going to play a role in setting up outflow boundaries. So essentially, where those storms start to dissipate and where they push out winds will set up some sorts of boundaries that separates more moist air versus more dry air, or warmer air versus colder air. And those boundaries are going to play a significant role in our severe weather this evening. It's also going to play a role in determining how far north our warm front is able to get in this afternoon, which is going to again affect a lot of severe weather and the potential risk for tornadoes this afternoon and into the evening hours. Now, for today's forecast, we are going to be focusing mostly on the timing of everything, but I wanted to reiterate the upper level support that's available to this system. By 7 p.m. here, looking at our 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity, that's just pretty much how much spin can the updraft ingest. Look at these values here. Some of these are insane. The white values there are maxing out the storm relative helicity from 0 to 3 kilometers. So this is 1,000 meters squared per second squared. And in our region here throughout southern Illinois and Indiana, that is going to be our most significant concern, where any supercells that can take advantage of that environment are going to really be able to get going and pose a significant risk for those more intense tornadoes, which is why the National Weather Service has issued that SIG 2 tornado risk in areas like Springfield, Peoria, Champaign, and Lafayette. I did want to quickly show you what I mean by SIG 1 or SIG 2 tornado risk. This is a new product from the Storm Prediction Center that's only been in use since March, and a lot of folks don't know about it. So this is the tornado intensity distribution by conditional intensity group. That's a lot of words to say pretty much how intense is your tornado most likely going to be if you get a tornado within a SIG 1, a SIG 2, or a SIG 3 risk. And you can see that distribution right here on this chart. In a SIG 2, which is what we have today, it's over 30% of tornadoes in that SIG 2 region will be an EF2 or greater. So that's kind of what that intensity scale means when the Storm Prediction Center puts that on the map. And finally, the last thing I wanted to take a look at before we get into the timing of everything today is a possible fail mode. So we're looking at our instability here. So this is again by 7 p.m. tonight during the middle of this outbreak potentially. And you can see this is your CAPE values. They're not jumping out at you. They're not screaming at you, right? You don't have a ton of instability in the atmosphere, and your mid-level lapse rates, which essentially are just how much is the temperature changing with height in the mid levels of the atmosphere, they're also not jumping out at you like crazy. And so what this means is that updrafts in essentially supercells in this environment may not be able to get going quite as explosively and as robust as you would need them to get if you wanted tornadoes. Again, this is good for residents. This provides a possible fail mode, and this is kind of why we didn't see a high risk come out of the Storm Prediction Center associated with today's possible outbreak. All right, jumping through our early afternoon hours, here we are by 4 p.m. Boom, you have this giant line of thunderstorms that's just gonna fire off like crazy. And as we go to 5, 6 p.m., now you've got a giant line of thunderstorms all the way from southeast Kansas through Indiana, and even this cluster in the Ohio Valley and into the Detroit area in the southern peninsula of Michigan, with tons of other thunderstorms going on throughout portions of the northern Midwest as well. But our number one concern is with this line of thunderstorms here. As you can see, a lot of these cells beginning to stay semi-discrete. This is still by 6 p.m., so 2 hours after initiation, we have some semi-discrete cells. Those are going to pose the greatest risk for our tornado threat. Now, I do want to say anything that becomes linear and stays in a line of thunderstorms is also going to pose the risk for embedded supercells with embedded strong tornadoes as well. I also wanted to point out this secondary line that sort of forms near Peoria here. Now, that's going to bring a secondary risk for another round of severe weather and tornadoes to roll right through already impacted areas throughout central Illinois and even pushing into southwestern Indiana and southern Illinois as the night goes on. As we keep rolling forward in time here, that's by 7, 8, 9, and 10 p.m., things become a little bit more linear, begin to start dissipating a little bit. That's going to be good. The severe weather threat's going to die down a little bit, but the risk for tornadoes and significant damaging winds will still be there. And if things become much more of a line, we're definitely going to lose some of that tornado risk and increase that wind risk dramatically. So we could be looking at hurricane force winds potentially in a giant straight line, a potential derecho style event that could be rolling through Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And another thing worth mentioning is that these storms are going to be moving at highway speeds. This is by 7 p.m. Some of these storms are going to be moving at 60 miles an hour. So these storms are going to be hauling, just flying. And if you're in the path of them, it's going to be really difficult to get out of the way. So if the tornado sirens go off in your region, you need to make sure that you're getting to the basement quickly with these. These aren't ones that you want to wait around, go on the porch and look outside at for a few minutes before you go into your storm shelter. You need to be going to that storm shelter right away because these storms are going to be flying. Now, keep in mind that this is coming from someone who would normally be out on the porch watching storms or even out in the field chasing them. I wouldn't be out on the porch tonight watching these. These are going to be moving quick. I would be in the basement, and that is what you should do too if those tornado sirens go off. Into the overnight hours here at 2 a.m. on Thursday, you can see this line continuing to push through Kentucky, the Virginias, Pennsylvania, with a large cluster of thunderstorms in the Northeast and in the Great Lakes as well. Also going on during that time is a cluster of thunderstorms and showers on the Gulf Coast. And again, that flooding risk is going to continue. And in the overnight hours, it can become especially dangerous as a lot of people will be sleeping. So make sure you're not getting swept away. Or if you're on the morning drive, make sure that you're paying very close attention to flooded roadways on Thursday. Pushing forward in time, this storm is going to continue to dissipate as it makes its way into the Northeast. The tornado threat will be long gone by 8 a.m. on Thursday. We do have a ton of precipitation coming through the south. And again, there is a small risk for some embedded tornadoes, some little spin up tornadoes that get going in that region as well because of the shearing, but it's not a very significant concern. As we roll through the day on Thursday, all that precipitation is just going to continue to linger in the southeast, bringing tons of rain and just dumping it in that region. Meanwhile, in the earlier morning hours here on Thursday, you're going to see all these thunderstorms in the Northeast, bringing the risk for widespread wind damage. That's going to be our number one concern. I'm not too worried about any kind of a tornado threat or any kind of a hail threat associated with these, maybe some very small hail, but the big risk is going to be associated with wind. So make sure that if you have any outdoor objects, you got them tied down, and make sure that your vehicles are in the garage if you have one so that tree limbs don't fall on them and total them. And finally, looking at Thursday afternoon, you're going to see this thunderstorm cluster up here in the Northeast continue to push off. This is by 2 p.m. on Thursday. It's going to continue to work its way out of the area. Areas like Portland might get a lot of precipitation and some stronger storms, but in general, it's just going to be a large cluster of thunderstorms and rain that's going to push off into the evening hours, and hopefully you'll be pretty much dry there by the time you get into the overnight hours, with some lingering showers and thunderstorms along parts of the mid-Atlantic and the East Coast. And again, that risk for just widespread flooding is going to continue for a couple of days here, really, with all the rainfall, especially as it continues to kind of flow once it falls onto the ground and kind of migrate into reservoirs and streams and other areas where water can accumulate. And finally, I did want to show the total precipitation that's going to accumulate over the next 48 hours for the South as well as the Midwest, as that flooding risk is most certainly going to be there. Here we are pushing through Thursday morning at this point, and as we finally get to the end of the day here on Thursday, this is now by midnight on Friday, essentially. So right as we get to, the turn of the hour on Friday, look at all this precipitation in the South. You're going to have the risk for widespread flooding also in the Midwest. But man, in the South, that flooding risk is going to be very significant. Pensacola getting more than 2¼ of an inch, Houston getting more than 3 inches, and areas in Mississippi and Alabama here probably getting upwards of 4, maybe 5, 6 inches. So that is a lot of rainfall, and the widespread flooding risk is going to very much continue over the next couple of days. Keep in mind that a lot of these areas, especially in Louisiana and Mississippi, have already received tons of rainfall over the last couple of days. So that flooding risk is going to be very significant. And that's going to bring us to the end of today's forecast, but we will be going live with multiple storm chasers in the field covering this entire severe weather outbreak this afternoon and evening. So make sure that you have notifications turned on for that. Thank you for trusting us as your source for trusted, honest, and reliable severe weather coverage, and we will see you soon.